and welcome everyone to this very interesting program featuring social history, social justice, and engineering. My name is David Rotenstein, and I'm a public historian and folklorist based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I do public history consulting, and I'm on the faculty of Goucher College's Masters in Historic Preservation program. Infrastructure and racial segregation have a long history in the United States and indeed North America. Railroads and highways frequently created firm boundaries separating racialized spaces. Many cities throughout North America have their other side of the tracks, or interstate highways that were built to separate Black neighborhoods from white neighborhoods. In some places like Detroit, Michigan, Decatur, Georgia, and Brentwood, Maryland, walls and other barricades divided Black space from white space. And there is a long history of infrastructure being weaponized to destroy Black communities by constructing rights-of-way through them, destroying homes, businesses, and churches. They also introduced visual, auditory, and particulate pollution, and they disrupted vital pedestrian and vehicular traffic networks. Sometimes infrastructure mediated segregated spaces. Bridges, like the Talbot Avenue Bridge in Silver Spring, Maryland, created essential connections between historically white and Black communities. For this talk, I'm going to talk about the Talbot Avenue Bridge's history as a common transportation structure that connected historically Black Littonsville with the Silver Spring Sundown suburb. I'd like to mention that part of my informal team are logged in here. Christopher Marston helped me with the hair documentation, and several members of the communities on both sides of the Talbot Avenue Bridge I see are actually logged in and watching as we speak. So I'd like to thank them for joining us. What distinguishes the Talbot Avenue Bridge from other engineering structures in racialized spaces is that historic preservation efforts over 3 decades failed to recognize the bridge's place in social history and the attachment to it by Littonsville residents. Though the bridge was demolished in 2019, grassroots preservation and commemorative efforts developed during its final 3 years that led to a greater understanding of the Silver Spring community's segregationist history and to the bridge being documented by the Historic American Engineering Record prior to its removal. The Talbot Avenue Bridge was a recycled and inverted railroad turntable. The turntable appears to have been fabricated based on a design originally patented in 1887. Railroads regularly recycled stock, including turntables and cars, into bridges. In 1918, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad moved the turntable from the company's Martinsburg, West Virginia shops to its Georgetown Junction, the place where the Georgetown branch met the Metropolitan branch just north of Washington, D.C. in Montgomery County, Maryland. The turntable replaced an earlier wood truss bridge that had been built around 1904. It originally carried an unnamed two-lane roadway over the railroad tracks. Over the years, the bridge had several official and informal names. The railroad called it Bridge 9A, some locals called it the Hanover Street Bridge, and then finally, throughout the last part of the 20th century, it was simply known as the Talbot Avenue Bridge. Many Littonsville residents, however, simply called it the bridge. Samuel Litton, a free African-American, first settled in the community to the west of the bridge in 1854, when he bought a four-acre farm. By the time Litton died in 1893, the community had grown into a thriving rural hamlet with a school, store, churches, and homes. Litton's family lost his property in foreclosure 2 years after he died. The Washington attorney who bought the land in foreclosure subdivided it and called it Littonville. White Montgomery County residents began calling the space Linden. Littonsville became one of several dozen Montgomery County rural hamlets founded by African Americans before the Civil War and during Reconstruction. The communities closest to the District of Columbia border forged close relationships with their counterparts inside the district. Collectively, they formed an extended borderlands community characterized by kinship ties, business and social relationships, and church affiliations. Like its counterparts throughout North America, Littonsville became a rural ghetto with no paved streets, no running water or sewer, and with nuisances closing in on its borders. The B&O Railroad condemned part of Samuel Litton's farm in 1892 to build the Georgetown branch. In the 1940s, Montgomery County opened one of its 2 trash incinerators at a site within the community. Also in the 1940s, radio broadcasters began building transmitters with tall antenna towers. Cumulatively, Littonsville experienced environmental racism on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, across the tracks, starting in the years bracketing the turn of the 20th century, residential subdivisions began appearing near an 1850s plantation founded by Francis Preston Blair. For much of the late 19th century, the area had been known as Sligo. Blair's descendants, who made their fortunes in real estate speculation in the second decade of the 20th century, branded the unincorporated community Silver Spring after the plantation. Silver Spring developed as what's called a sundown suburb, a place where racially restrictive deed covenants kept African Americans from buying and renting homes. Jim Crow segregation prevented Blacks from patronizing many of the businesses in the growing suburb. For much of the 20th century, the few African Americans who lived in Silver Spring were domestic servants, maids, gardeners, and chauffeurs. Silver Spring remained rigidly segregated until the late 1960s. Responding to external pressures, including federal agencies moving large Black workforces to places like Silver Spring and the county seat Rockville, and to increase civil rights activism, Montgomery County passed a series of laws gradually outlawing discrimination in public accommodations and in housing. Even as late as 1967, many Silver Spring residents boasted that one of the community's best attributes was its lack of Black residents. As Montgomery County enacted laws prohibiting discrimination based on race, the county also moved forward with an ambitious urban renewal program designed to eliminate what it called blighted housing and to improve economically distressed neighborhoods. These included communities inside cities like Rockville, as well as rural hamlets like Littonsville. Most of the places Montgomery County targeted were historically Black communities like Littonsville, which the county determined was one of the highest priority areas for redevelopment. To white Montgomery County leaders and residents, Littonsville was blighted and stigmatized. Stigmatized sites are an industrial archaeology staple. We study tanneries, paper mills, and chemical plants that polluted the air, water, and earth. The sites and people associated with them frequently were stigmatized. This means they were discredited, marginalized, and collectively devalued. Stigmatization makes it easy to erase the sites and people through cleanups, renewals, and revitalizations. The Talbot Avenue Bridge case offers us an opportunity to explore stigmatization through a different lens. Multiple layers of stigmatization, from the stigmatized spaces and people of Littonsville to the stigmatized artifact, the bridge itself, and to the divergent responses to the impending demolition in 2019. This stigmatization is fully illustrated in the graffiti that appeared on the bridge in 2016 or 2017, bold letters spelling out the word junk. Historic preservation evaluations consistently focused on the bridge as an engineering artifact and its associations with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Regulatory studies done to comply with the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act agreed with earlier evaluations that the bridge was eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places for these reasons only. To resolve the adverse effects to the bridge by its demolition to build a new light rail line, the Purple Line, historic preservation consultants agreed to complete a new Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties form. Meanwhile, as these studies were winding down, residents in the communities on both sides of the tracks began collaborating on ways to commemorate the bridge. They asked county and state officials for different alternatives to simply demolishing the structure. Their efforts yielded a promise by Montgomery County officials to relocate the turntable center span to a nearby park. And the collaborations among the neighborhoods resulted in several community commemorative events, including a celebration marking the bridge's 100th birthday, a lantern walk, and a candlelight vigil. Finally, in early 2019, a historic American engineering record team independently documented the bridge. And here we have on the left, Christopher Marston, in the center, Todd Croteau, a National Park Service photographer, and Jared Ortiz, who shot the archival digital photos of the Talbot Avenue Bridge structure. The grassroots mitigation efforts forged new bonds among neighborhoods once divided by race and racism. At the 2018 centennial celebration, the president of the Civic Association in the historically white North Woodside neighborhood became emotional as he read a proclamation passed by his organization renouncing the racial restrictive covenants once placed on the properties there.
Racially restrictive deed covenants were common in Silver Spring in the 20th century. I'm going to read an excerpt from one from my neighborhood, North Woodside, dated in 1923. For the purpose of sanitation and health, the buyer shall not sell or lease the said land to any one of a race whose death rate is higher than that of the white race. It is evidence that at one time, people in my neighborhood were interested in keeping it white.
Collectively, the commemorative activities and collaborations transformed the Talbot Avenue Bridge from contested space mediating the break between historically Black and white spaces into a space for reflection, reconciliation, and repair. The connections made before the bridge was demolished endured into the pandemic as neighborhoods worked to mutually assist each other in response to the public health and economic crisis. The Talbot Avenue Bridge is a remarkable example illustrating the potential to expand the ways in which we understand historic infrastructure and the approaches we take to preserving it, and the many lessons we take back to our academic communities, our jobs, and communities themselves in collaboration, repair, and reconciliation. Thank you.
And David, you had indicated the bridge structure itself was relocated to a park. Did I recall that correctly from your presentation?
That's the plan. The plan was initially to simply demolish it, send the elements to a landfill. After the residents began advocating for a better commemorative approach to the structure, the county worked out a deal with the Department of Transportation to relocate the former turntable center span to a park that would be adjacent to a multi-use trail next to the light rail that required demolition of the bridge. Right now, the bridge is in a DOT storage structure awaiting completion of the rail line and park. And theoretically, at some point in the future, the bridge will be relocated there and perhaps interpreted.